What's up guys, it's Jordan here from SwitchWatch with today's review of Turok 2 Seeds of Evil on the Nintendo Switch. Let's see how this one is. For me, playing the original Turok on the Nintendo Switch was a breath of fresh air. Its classic arcadey nature felt so good on the go, and it wasn't just the nostalgia, it felt even better than before. So of course I was quite excited for the sequel to come too. I have less nostalgia for this, only playing it at a friend's house for a couple of hours one day, so this is pretty much a new game 20 years later. How much do I like it? Or do I? The story in Turok 2 plays a much greater role. In the original it was probably shoehorned into the manual, while the game itself was barren of it. Here though, there are cutscenes, lots of them. Turok is guided by a Twi'lek rented from Star Wars who tells him of his mission objectives to thwart the threat of the dino-like creatures who are controlled by some alien guy. I'll be honest, the story struggled to grip me for the fact that the narration and exposition was being told so slowly and quietly. It was so difficult to keep up that I lost interest after the first level. But you're not really playing Turok for the sci-fi story, are you?
You will also be given additional missions.
Whether you played Turok 1 for the first time on the Nintendo 64 or in the HD remaster on the Nintendo Switch, when you pick up Turok 2 for the first time afterwards, you'll instantly feel how different it is. The unlikely success of the original obviously upped the budget for the sequel, and the developers wanted to create something bigger and better, and in many regards they did. Turok 2 retains much of what made the original game so great. A vast myriad of off-the-wall weapons, fantastic animations for the time, and retaining all the gore that was often not seen on the Nintendo platform. But it does feel rather different to the original. This time, it's slightly slower, going for a more serious, considered approach to the gameplay. The hilariously generous auto-aim has been removed, which makes hitting your target far more difficult this time around. No more sniper shotguns, unfortunately. Thankfully, this release does have added gyro controls, which is always a must in first-person shooters these days. And due to the more difficult nature of getting your bullets on target, it's even more welcome than ever. Your arsenal is upped significantly with different ammo types, zooming in and aiming, and more weapons than you know what to do with. You'll feel far more capable this time around, but you will need to be since enemy AI has definitely seen an improvement. They'll gang up on you, they'll run away if need be, and you can sneak up on them if they're facing away from you. You'll probably think that they're a little bit too bullet spongy, bearing in mind that I played on normal difficulty, but once you start getting used to the aiming, you'll be taking them down with awesome headshots, and that feels so good. The levels are absolutely massive, perhaps too long for the game's own good. Each set in a different location, whether it be the starting port village or in a swamp. There's a nice variety here. It's a step up from the mostly jungle settings of the original. Objectives have become more varied too. You'll usually have more than one thing to do at a time, whether it be rescuing prisoners, turning on beacons, or defending a point. It's definitely more complicated than before, which can lead you to wandering around a bit lost on these large stages. Thankfully, this release includes waypoint markers on your screen showing you where you need to head. I don't like using these, but I feel they are necessary here. If they weren't here, I'd have been wandering around hours and hours just to find out where the next switch was. I think looking at it in a bubble, Turok 2 is the better game. You can feel it had more time in the oven, you can see the developers have got a grasp of the hardware and their creation tools. It's the better game, for sure. But it does lack that bit of charm that made the original so special for me, even to this day. The original was very reminiscent of Doom, with its generous auto-aim, speedy gameplay, and eternally charming ability to be picked up and played at any time. Turok 2 isn't like that. It's more serious, erring to the more model FPS design that was becoming so popular. That doesn't make it bad at all. Like I said, it's technically the better game and is fun, but I prefer the original style. Can you think of any examples of that, where you think the sequel to a game is unequivocally better in many ways, but not as good or as fun as the one before? I'm thinking of Suikoden, but I know I'm in the minority who likes the first more than the second, despite the second being much better. How about you guys? Can you think of any games like that? Now, I remember Turok 2 having quite a fun multiplayer component, but unless I'm really missing something, it appears not to be in this release, which is unfortunate. I know that kind of couch multiplayer gameplay is dead for a shooter, but it would have been nice to have the complete package. The soundtrack to Turok 2 is fantastic. While I'm sure the original files are now in an uncompressed state, it's hard to believe such quality was able to be produced using the Nintendo 64 hardware. While it may be less iconic than the original, it's higher quality, no question, and despite the long length of the levels, you won't be getting bored of the soundtrack anytime soon. It's really very good, and highly underrated, I think. I don't really see people mentioning the soundtrack to Turok 2 that much. You can switch between the original Nintendo 64 soundtrack or the slightly laboured PC release. I'm not sure why you would want to choose the weaker PC version, aside from perhaps you were one of the few people who are nostalgic for that release rather than the far more popular Nintendo 64 release.
Distress beacon activated.
There's also a surprising amount of voice acting, well, if you can hear it over the mix of the music and sound effects. It's pretty poor but ambitious for the original hardware, I guess. Visually, the game is obviously nothing compared to today's standards, but the low poly models are still somewhat appealing when put into HD. It's an improvement on the original in many aspects. Textures, models, animation were all a big step up at the time, and comparing them both today in HD side by side, it's a surprisingly stark difference. It's less charming the second time around, I suppose, but there's a grittier feel which I'm less of a fan of, but for the time, this would have been amazing. One of the best looking games around, I'm sure. Looking at performance, I have to say, it's pretty disappointing. The first Turok game on the Switch felt very smooth to me, even though people pointed out that it wasn't quite perfect. I didn't really notice anything too major for the most part. However, I constantly noticed many frame dips throughout my time with Turok 2. Not huge dips, but enough to make it feel far more sluggish than it should. It's over 20 years old, and yes, I do realize this is a HD port with far more going on, but come on guys, it should not be like this. I'm hoping there will be a patch in the coming days or weeks. In the meantime, I did a bit of fiddling around with the graphics options, and if you turn off the advanced lighting effects, then it does improve things quite a lot. Not perfectly, but more in line with something acceptable. On the eShop, Turok 2 is priced at £15.79 on the UK eShop, which I think is a fair price, but it's worth noting that there is a 15% discount for the first week, I believe. I think it's definitely worth that price, and despite its age, it still holds up as a really good shooter on the Switch. Not that there's a huge amount of competition but it'll be difficult to find another shooter of equal price that's better than this. I don't think you can. And it's also worth noting that Turok 2, along with Turok 1, is getting a physical release under the Limited Run Games banner. It's a little bit disappointing that they're not in one package together, but it is what it is. While I'm happy it's getting a physical release, I'd always prefer them not to be from Limited Run Games when possible, due to the fact that they only go up in price rather than down, despite not actually being that limited. And their shipping costs make me only go for the really special releases. But yeah, you can pre-order them right now, I believe, so you can go there and secure your copy with a pre-order if you don't want to miss out. Before we get into my final thoughts on Turok 2 Seeds of Evil, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're new here and that little bell to keep up with all our Nintendo Switch content. We do reviews, we do gameplays, we do lots of features. It's well worth it for any Switch owner. If you're not new and you're a regular Switch watcher, then continue to show your support with a thumbs up and a comment telling us what you think of Turok 2. Tell us your memories of this game. Do you have any? Or will this be your first time playing it on the Nintendo Switch? We would love to know. Okay, so overall, if you loved Turok 2 back in the day on the Nintendo 64, you'll be pleasantly surprised at how well it holds up on the Nintendo Switch more than 20 years later. Performance woes aside, it's a nice way to experience a classic once again, this time on the go. For me, it holds up less well than the original in terms of playability, thanks to the less arcadey nature this time, but the level design is spot on, and in terms of fun, even by today's standard, you get something out of Turok 2. It's a good 7 out of 10. Not quite as good as the original for me. Don't forget to check out my review of the original, plus some of our other recent videos. We've got a lot of content, guys, so we'll see you over there. Take care.